Hey, what's going on, guys? Mike here, back in the living room today. We're going to be talking about the shrimp tank again. We're going to be hooking it up with steroids, aka CO2, and talk a little bit about my strategy behind how I want to do it, because we are running the 24/7 feature on the Phoenix fixture, so might have to modify things a little bit. But before we get into that, and also talking about the Mangrove Tank at the end of this video, I know some of you guys are really interested in when that's all going to happen, so I'll address that. First, I wanted to say thank you so much for buying t-shirts, sweatshirts, all that stuff. You guys really outdid yourself. Thank you so much. Because it was so successful, I'm gonna extend the AQUAPROS t-shirt apparel thing for a few more days, and I'm thinking what I'm gonna do is sort of like every 2 weeks or maybe monthly, I'll change things up, introduce a new style of t-shirt to just keep things fresh and you guys with some options for some cool apparel and to support the channel. There's a link down in the description if you want to check it out. There will also be a link to the previous video where we set up this really cool shrimp tank, just in case you didn't catch that. So let me go ahead and flip the camera around and we'll talk about what we're doing today. The tank overall is looking pretty good. We're just a few days, from the start of the build, so I wouldn't expect anything too crazy to happen, but the parameters have stayed fairly consistent. The pH did increase a little bit. Again, we added this Suryu stone that does raise the pH, but nothing alarming at this point. We're just gonna keep monitoring it. But beyond that, the tank is done. The 24/7 mode is running on the fixture, and I really like it, just coming out to the living room and seeing the tank go through the different light phases. Right now it's 3 p.m., so we're in sort of the middle of the day setting, or the highest light setting. But the last thing that we need to do to this tank is hook up CO2. So down here, as I mentioned in the previous video where we set the tank up, that I wanted to use Paintball CO2, and here I have 3 20-ounce Paintball CO2 tanks that are all filled up. This is like probably a year's supply, and I've already sort of hooked everything up. So I have my regulator here that has a solenoid. This is an Aquatech regulator. I'll put links down to all this stuff down in the description just in case you want to check it out. But, this is sort of like the go-to setup, or the best way to do the Paintball CO2. Get yourself a, kind of an expensive regulator for what it is, but it's super, super important that you have this. And so what I've done already before we just hook it up here is I've hooked up everything else. So I just have a little glass diffuser in here. This is a really tiny one. We have the CO2-proof tubing that snakes up here, held on with some suction cups. And then it comes down into a little glass bubble counter, and then we have more suction cups to hold everything on. We have a check valve, very important. We don't want any back siphoning to occur. And then it runs down to where it's going to plug into the regulator. So we have that right here. So all we have to do is plug in to our regulator and then attach our regulator to a tank, of course. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You'll probably be watching me do that right now. I just like to attach the regulator, hand tight as I can get it. You can use a wrench. You can also wrap the threads with some plumber's tape if you're having issues with any leaks. You'll find that out after. Once we get the regulator on, then we just attach the CO2 tubing to this little output and make sure that we're on low so we don't just dump a bunch of CO2 in here. And then we need to plug in the solenoid. So we plug the solenoid in, and right now I have that on a timer. So now as we open this valve, then our CO2 should start coming through our bubble counter, and we can tell kind of roughly how much is going in. So you can see here that, I don't know, we're coming in at like 3 or 4 bubbles a second. I'll probably tune it back a little bit, but the reason why I'm gonna run the bubble rate a little bit faster than normal is because if we come over here and look at our diffuser here, it's not really doing the best job of making the tiniest bubbles. This is our super cheap diffuser, and I should probably, get a new one. There's a lot of better ones. Actually, Aquatech makes one that I like a lot that has a really good ceramic plate on it, but it's just a little big. So I don't know. I'm not, saying this is what we're going to use for the whole time, but I definitely just needed to get some CO2 into this tank, and this is what I had. And the timer right now is not set to be on right when the light comes on, because remember, this fixture, the light is pretty much always on, again, because we're going through and using the 24/7 mode. So I've set up the timer to where the CO2 will come on at right before noon. So we're going to get a little bit of CO2 building up in the water column right before the most intense lighting period is on the fixture. Like I said, we're at 3 o'clock right now, and the lighting is the most intense. Once the fixture reaches the point where it hits 6, it's going to get a lot, it's not going to be as intense. And then that is when I'm going to have the CO2 just turn completely off. I don't want to run CO2 when we run into the 6 o'clock phase and, later into the night, because the lighting isn't going to be as intense, right? So if the lighting isn't super bright, it's going to drive less photosynthesis, and that means that the CO2, if it's still constant, it's going to build up in the water column, and it's going to cause the pH to fluctuate a lot more. It's going to cause the pH to go down probably more than I want. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to test it to see, just how low it gets as a result of that. But I'm thinking that this is the best way to do it. We'll just have to see. If I wasn't using the 24/7 mode, then I wouldn't have to really worry about it. I could just do the normal thing, have my CO2 come on, an hour or two before the light does, and then turn off like an hour before the light turns off. But because we're doing the little experiment here, we're gonna continue to do more experiments inside of experiments and just see how this works out. And also, guys, remember, this is a very poor way to diffuse CO2 in your aquarium. It's definitely not my favorite method by any means, but because it's a smaller setup and I'm not running a canister filter, I don't have a ton of other options. There are a few, but again, we're just gonna go with this for the time being. So yeah, I mean, the shrimp tank is whatever, it's only been up for a few days. We don't really know what's going to happen here, but the CO2 I feel was really important for, the S-Repins, and the Pogostemon will really appreciate it as well. And I mean, everything in this tank will appreciate having that CO2. So, the hair grass in the back is doing pretty well. It's growing up, and yeah, I'm excited to see what happens to this tank. You guys, a few of you gave some pretty good suggestions on, what to name this tank. Orange Crush was one of them. There was a bunch of interesting names that involved mountains and stuff, but I'm still deciding. So if you guys have suggestions for what to name this tank, keep dropping it down in the comments below. I also added in a couple of scuba Lego guys up here in the filter. I was gonna put them in the tank just kind of as a joke, but they float and I didn't really want to super glue them to anything. So if you think they need names too, leave them down in the comments. All right, guys, enough of the shrimp tank. There's not a whole lot going on in here yet. Let's go out into the aquarium lab and talk about what the heck is going on with the mangrove tank. So this, guys, is why the mangrove tank doesn't have its fish in it. It's full of Java fern right now because I ended up taking down the 72, which is currently just filled with plants because I'm getting ready to set up a ton of new tanks here in the next month, and I needed somewhere to grow stuff out. I had to get the Java fern up out of there. And my biggest thing is I don't want to take these pieces to the local fish store and just give them away because, I mean, they're so valuable to me. I don't know, man. That's this piece right here is at least a $200 piece, and it's hard for me to just go and, get $20 of store credit for it. It's an instant aquascape. It holds a lot of value to me. Especially, if I'm going to be setting up big tanks, which I'm not going to be setting up a ton of big tanks in the house or anything like that. They're primarily going to be smaller ones that don't need this, but it's just so hard for me to get rid of them, But I do have a friend that is going to take this one big piece, and then there's still a couple more back there. Remember, the 72 had a bunch of this stuff in it. So I'm getting closer. I haven't just totally bailed on the mangrove tank or anything, but just bear with me. I'm sorry that it's taking so long. It will happen, okay? I promise. Side note, the 125 is looking really good. I just did a massive cleaning on it yesterday, changed the filter padding out, which was just making this tank a nightmare. I hadn't changed the filter pad in forever. So we also have, all the tetras that were in the 72 are in here, and from time to time, the cardinal tetras school really well together, and this tank looks really good. But it is getting, pretty close to capacity here. There's a lot of fish in here. I don't even want to count how many, but the Pinnatophyta is looking really good. I got to do another video on the Pinnatophyta because I've learned some new stuff about it, and I think it's really cool. So maybe in the next video we'll talk about that. But the 125 also needs a rescape. It's getting crazy. The Blix is out of control. What I did was I hooked up one more bulb here in my AQUAPROS T5 HO fixture. I was running just one, but I put another bulb in both of the fixtures, and everything's looking really good. The Blixa is growing like crazy. It looks a little, you know, it's not as green as it was before, but I mean, it's grown so much more since I increased the light. So 125 looking good. Trying not to feed it a ton because there's a lot of fish in here, man, but everything's going pretty well. I think that's gonna do it for today's update video or whatever the heck this was. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and thank you so much for going and buying t-shirts. It makes a huge difference. You have no idea. Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to leave your suggestions for the name of the shrimp tank in the comments below. And as always, guys, we will see you next time.